Section 1. The world they rode back through was not the world they had left. Lena noticed it first at the rivers. Every watercourse the company crossed on the long road north, canyon streams, fen melt channels, the deep springs that surfaced through the red country's dry stone, was warm, not fever warm. Warm the way the shore at the bottom of the world had been warm, alive, running with a faint golden thread in the current that turned every brook into a vein of the deep made visible. The rivers of Ilarion had always been the world sea's fingers. Now the fingers were glowing. Post-operative perfusion, Lena said, kneeling at a stream on the third day, her stethoscope pressed to the water. The deep's pulse came through clearly, steady, vast, unhurried. Not the patience of something holding, the patience of something healing. The surgery restarted circulation. Every river, every spring, it's all running clean for the first time in 900 years. The system is using the running to check itself. Is that good? Phelan asked, filling canteens. It's the best sign there is. A body that checks itself is a body that intends to last. She stood and looked north, and the shimmer was there. The transparency between the two moons, growing clearer every day, the ghost of another world showing through. What I don't know is what the checking finds. 900 years of wrong-keeping left damage everywhere the fever reached. The pool is healed, but the plumbing isn't. There will be pockets. Remnants. Dangerous? In my experience, the last 10% of any recovery is where 80% of the complications live. The changed world showed itself in smaller ways too, between the rivers and the road. Flowers that had bloomed in one season now bloomed in two. The deep's flush disrupting surface cycles that had depended, without knowing it, on the fever's steady drain. Birds the lawmasters had classified as deep country species appeared over the fen, riding thermals that should not have existed. And in every town the company passed, people spoke of hearing things in the water, not voices, a presence, when you drew a cup from a well, that the water was gently, sleepily aware. The deep was post-operative, and post-operative patients do not lie perfectly still. They murmur, they run small diagnostics in their sleep that the world above feels as dreams. The company rode north through the dreaming world in a formation that would have given any single nation's lawmasters a crisis of classification. Elves and dwarves and canyon wolves, one former enemy of the age in borrowed grey, and a translucent prophet who left no footprints. And the road, which bonded every company that ever rode it, worked its slow alchemy. Derm's dwarves and Valis's wardens, who had been circling each other with professional caution since the fen, discovered on the second night the universal solvent of soldiers everywhere, complaint. And by the fifth camp, the deep tongue and the elven watch signs were trading vocabulary across the fire. Gazra's wolves taught everyone the brine tactic. Ithreni taught the wolves her compound mixing. Phelan taught all of them the count relay in 5 different rhythms, and the whole column marched to one pulse, which was, Lena noted clinically, the deep's own recommendation, 3, and then 1. Doromir stood at a mountain stream on the third night, alone. Lena watched from the camp's edge, giving him the distance, and held the tear under the current. The crystal blazed. The stream blazed back. The king of the Kant Peaks knelt in the water of his own country and felt, for the first time since his father had set the chain around his neck, the tear answer something that was not his heartbeat, but the deep's own pulse. He looked up at the shimmer forming between the moons and said to the stream, to the father and sister kept in the water running through his fingers, I understand now. It was never the mountain that kept us. It was always the water. The mountain was just the cup it chose. And there were the complications, because there were always complications. The caravan of Unbecome came out of the east on the 5th day, 73 former crossing-born, led by Gazra's wolves, making their slow way north toward Cantalar. They traveled like refugees of a war fought inside their own bodies, some walking steadily, some carried on litters, most speaking in fragments through decades of overwritten script. Aval walked among them translating, and the translating was the strangest restitution Lena had ever witnessed, the architect of the cloaks, speaking the languages of the people he had cloaked, serving as the bridge between what they had been and what they were becoming. An unbecome man of 2 centuries gripped Aval's arm on the road and said, in a voice unused for 160 years, I know your hand. You wrote me into the dark. A long silence. And now you carry my water. Why? Because carrying your water is the only sentence that fits the page. Aval said, and held the gaze without asking for forgiveness, because Lena had been clear that forgiveness was not a clinical term. The walking on afterward was not forgiveness either, but it was the thing that comes before forgiveness in every recovery ward. Coexistence, chosen, with the choosing costing everything and nothing guaranteed. Phelan was the first to crack the perimeter around the former sorcerer. On the fourth night, he brought Aval a bowl of soup without being asked, sat down beside him, and said, "So, you're the one who did all that, and the healer told you not to flinch. What's it like, having a doctor scarier than you?" "Deeply inconvenient," said Aval, accepting the soup with fingers that had not held anything freely given in 3 centuries, "and profoundly necessary." "That's not a gift," Phelan said. "That's a count, 3 and then 1. You'll learn it." The friction eased by the 5th night. It would never become warmth. Some distances are climbed, not closed. But it became functional, and functional, Lena had learned, across 2 worlds of night shifts, was where healing started. It was an elderly elf woman from the caravan who changed everything, a lawmaster, script-scarred and newly clear-eyed, who took Lena's wrist on the road with the grip of someone carrying a finding too long alone. "The count," she said. 3 and then 1. "I heard it through 60 years of the cloak, healer. Your rhythm reached me in the dark, and I held to it the way the drowning hold to anything that floats." The old eyes searched her face. "It is the deep's own pulse, not a heartbeat, a keeping beat. 3 for the held, 1 for the holder. The water taught it to your father's hands without knowing it had a name, and your father taught it to you without knowing what he taught." The script-scarred fingers pressed the count into Lena's wrist, and the stream beside them pulsed gold in answer. "You are not using the deep's rhythm, counter. You are the deep's rhythm. It grew you the way the grove grew the olive. You are the 5th graft, healer. You have been since a carpenter's hand squeezed a girl's in a white room, and the water recognized its own pulse in the pattern and lit a lamp that has not gone out since." The stream ran gold. The company rode on, and Lena stood on a canyon road with the whole architecture of 2 worlds rearranging itself around 4 beats, and felt, for the first time since a woman had whispered, "Now it is your turn," that the sentence had been translated. Not a summons, a recognition. You were always this. The shimmer grew, day by day. On the 7th morning, Lena looked up at the transparency between the moons and saw, for the first time clearly, what was on the other side, and stopped breathing. A ceiling, fluorescent panels, the specific institutional white of a hospital corridor, rendered in the sky like a reflection in deep water, a nurse crossing with a clipboard, a gurney against a wall. Her world, hanging in the sky of another universe, like a window not yet open. "That's where you're from," Phelan said quietly. "That's where I'm from, and the deep is building a door to it, in the sky, while we ride." Doromir rode beside her in the shimmer light, and the quiet between them had become its own country, settled, with its own customs. "The membrane," he said. "Permeable, a door that opens from both sides." He was looking at the ghost of her world through the thinning between. "When the 5 grafts stand at the Sareth, the window opens. To your world, to a Tuesday." "I know," she said. "And I could go home. And come back? If it's a membrane, yes. If it scars shut, no, never." She held his hand across the space between their saddles, and the tear pulsed its 10,000-year count, and Bram's and Otter's lamps burned steady. "So we'd better make sure it's a membrane, Doromir, because I intend to introduce you to Tuesdays, personally." "I have been warned about Tuesdays," said the king of the Kant Peaks. "I intend to hate them with you." Sarathiel, translucent in the morning light, looked up at the shimmer and said the thing that made the silence after it the heaviest of the road. "The membrane forms whether you reach the Sareth or not, healer. The surgery healed the infection. The 5 grafts at the river heal the wound itself and shape the scar into a living door. But a wound healing on its own schedule does what wounds do. It closes. If the 5 grafts do not reach the Sareth before the membrane finishes forming, the door will be what the wound decides, and a wound left to its own devices always chooses the same thing. "Scar tissue," Lena whispered. "A wall, permanent. 2 worlds sealed apart forever. No fence," Doromir said quietly. "No Tuesday." The shimmer's clock, visible now, a round face on a ghost wall, read 4:17 in the morning. The hands were moving. The wound was healing on its own schedule, and the schedule was not waiting for 5 grafts or 1 healer. It was waiting for dawn. The Kant Peaks appeared on the 11th day, rising out of the northern haze like a memory returning. And Lena, who had left this mountain carrying nothing but a drum bead and a stethoscope and the weight of a dead king's last lesson, rode toward it now, carrying 4 grafts, a company of 4 nations, and the knowledge that she herself was the 5th piece of a puzzle she had been solving from inside. The approach up the silver switchbacks was a homecoming and a reunion and a reckoning, all braided together the way this world braided everything. The golden veins in the living rock of the road were blazing, brighter than she remembered, brighter than any season the Lawmaster's records held, and the great trees of the foothills had turned their silver leaves toward the company in the same sunflower gesture the Tarian's grove had made, because the roots ran deep, and the deep was singing, and the whole mountain knew what was coming up its switchbacks before the horns confirmed it. The horns confirmed it anyway, because Cantalar was Cantalar, and some traditions were not negotiable. They heard the city before they saw it. The horns rolled down off the Kant Peaks on the 14th day. Not warning horns, not any call in the Lawmaster's vocabulary. This was new, composed in their absence, for their return, by a mountain that had watched the whole war through a blind woman's stone. The call was named the Healer's Return. At the ivory gates, 2 figures waited. The remembrancer stood at the left pillar, blind face raised to the horn sound she had composed. I have drunk every road you walked, healer, the shore, the chamber, the membrane, the corridor, the grove, and one thing more. The blind face tilted. The stone has been singing since the flowers opened, not recording, singing. In the language of the keeping, 4 beats, and it will not stop. In 3,000 years I have never heard my instrument improvise. A smile, ancient and paper dry. Welcome home, child. The mountain's memory has been waiting. And beside the right pillar, standing in the fall's mist, knee-deep in the cascade, Neriveth of the southern shores, sea-glass eyes bright, open-armed. And beside her, translucent and luminous in the running water, visiting the way the kept visit when the door is open, Merlin, slim and silver-haired and weeping and whole, rendered in the cascade, not trapped, not screaming, but arriving, the way Lyriel had promised a kneeling brother in a membrane chamber. Break the spear, and the door becomes a river, and the river runs to me, and I will be waiting on the shore with my arms already open. The mother and daughter stood in the water together, and 30 years of a bargain struck on a bridge in the snow, and a spear tip's worth of screaming, and one old traitor's whole long penance, settled at last into the only form the keeping accepted, reunion in running water, on a terrace of the city that had spent a season learning to share its dead. Neriveth's sea-glass eyes found Lena's across the gate. One look, brief, containing everything a 30-year debtor sends to the hand that cancelled the debt. And then the old lady returned her gaze to the cascade and to the daughter in it, and was done with the world for a while. Then a small figure broke the formal line at a dead run, bandage roll in one hand and drum bead in the other, and Teranil threw himself at the healer of 2 worlds. You came back, he said, muffled and fierce. The flowers opened and the stones are singing, and I kept the count the whole time, and you have to tell me everything. I will, said Lena, holding the boy who had shown her drum under a sky learning to be a window. But first, I need to see a river about a fence. And the 10,000 fists of Cantalar found 10,000 chests, and the count rolled up through the crystal towers, and down through the braided falls, and out across the mountain range, in a sound that was not the old drumming, and was not the new horns, but was both, woven, the way every true thing on 2 worlds had turned out to be woven. And the healer of 2 worlds stood in the gates of her second home, with the shimmer brightening above her, and the clock behind it ticking, and the dawn of her own world approaching 1 minute at a time, and understood, with the calm that only comes on the far side of the longest shift, that the last leg of the journey was the shortest and the most important. Ashvale for the ring, the Sareth for the healing, and a membrane forming in the sky that would either become a wall or a window, depending on whether a small human woman in a borrowed cloak could reach a holy river before a wound decided to scar. 3 and then 1, 3 and then 1. The count held, the count had always held, and the shift was almost over. Section 2. Avel of the Deep Keepers walked through the ivory gates of Cantalar for the first time without a borrowed face. And the city that had buried a lord of holes 3 seasons ago watched the architect of every hole walk in under his own name, and the silence that received him was not the silence of the mountain deciding what he was. It was the silence of a mountain that had already decided, through a blind woman's stone and a season of singing, and was now watching its decision arrive in person. He walked the crystal streets behind Lena's company, flanked by Gazra's wolves, not guarded, attended in the clinical sense, because Lena's prescription had not changed and was not changing, and the elves of Canthalar lined the channeled streets and looked at him the way they had once looked at Lena herself, with the held breath of people meeting a verdict not yet read aloud. Mothers did not turn children's faces toward him. Mothers turned children's faces away, and Avel saw it, and bore it, and walked on, because bearing things was the only craft he had left, and the bearing was the beginning of the chart. It was at the fountain of the lower terraces, Terranil's fountain, the drum fountain, where the children had once saluted a healer with their fists, that the first voice spoke from the crowd. An old elf, scarred, a veteran of the Sundering War's grandchildren, who stepped from the line and said to the street, to the escort, to no one in particular, he wore Mathor's face, in this city, at the king's table, for 30 years. The column did not stop. Lena did not stop. But Avel stopped, because the charge was true, and stopping was the only honest response to a true charge, and 3 centuries of dishonest responses had brought him to this street. He turned to the old veteran, and the grey-green eyes held the accusation without flinching, and the voice that had been ash on snow said, in its new, uncertain register, I did. I wore your lord's face, and I sat at your king's table, and I listened to your council's secrets for 30 years, and the man whose face I wore had been dead since the night I took his shape, and I let you mourn a chair, and never told you the chair was occupied. He did not look away. The standard of care required attendance, and attendance required eyes. And now I walk your streets in my own face, and my own face has earned every silence your city gives it, and I will not ask for a silence less than I have earned. I am here because the healer requires my presence for the road ahead, and because my chart is long, and because the uncertain voice found, briefly, something that was not confidence, but was its geological precursor. Because I owe this mountain a lord of holes, and the only way I know to pay that debt is to be here while the mountain decides what a lord of holes costs. The old veteran looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Lena, at the escort, at the company of 4 nations walking behind a human woman in a white coat, and said the thing that the lower terraces would argue about for a generation. The healer vouches for him. The healer treats him, Lena said. Vouching is a different department. The treatment is ongoing. The chart is open, and the patient is attending. That's the standard, and the standard is the same standard that brought me into this city the first time, when nobody here wanted a human either. The old veteran considered this. Then he stepped back into the line, and the city's silence resumed, and the column walked on, and the silence was, Lena diagnosed it with the clinical ear she could never turn off, 1 degree less cold. Progress, in recovery, is measured in degrees, not in revolutions. The War Council met at moonrise in the Hall of the Nine, the hall where Lena had once stood accused, where a boy had testified about drums, where a vote of golden spheres had decided the shape of the age, and the council that gathered was nothing any prior age would have recognized. 3 kings had sent representatives or come themselves. Kale held the mountain as steward. Skalvar's voice arrived through Durm's square authority. Tarek's eyes through Gazra's single eye. Doramir sat the crystal throne his father had died in. Sat it for the first time, the council noted, without the particular tension of a man who felt he was borrowing. And the tear pulsed slow at his throat. Sarethiel stood at the circle's edge, translucent, a prophet finally in a room instead of between them. The remembrancer sat in her alcove, her stone singing its 4-beat improvisation beneath the proceedings, like a pulse beneath a conversation. And Avel of the Deep Keepers sat where no enemy of the age had ever sat, in a chair the council had debated for 2 hours before agreeing to place, at the table, not at its head, not at its foot. At its side, the position, Lena had specified, of a consulting specialist, close enough to be heard, not close enough to be confused with a decision-maker. The business was the shimmer, and the shimmer was a clock, and the clock did not negotiate. The membrane forms on its own schedule, Sarethiel said, standing at the great window where the shimmer was now visible day and night, a permanent transparency in the sky above the Kant peaks, and through it, growing clearer by the hour, the ghost of a hospital corridor, a parking lot, a streetlight, the ordinary architecture of a world that had no idea it was being watched by 10,000 years of crystal towers. The wound heals because the infection is gone and the deep circulation has returned. Scar tissue is forming. At the current rate, the glass eyes, which had spent 300 years measuring the space between the worlds, closed briefly, calculating. The membrane seals permanently within 12 days. After that, wall. No door, no window, no crossing, no visiting. 2 worlds, separated forever, the way they were before the wound was cut. Except this time the separation is biological, not architectural. You cannot rewound a scar. 12 days, Doromir said. To reach Ashvale, recover the ring, return to the Sareth, and perform the ritual that turns the scar into a living membrane. The Sareth runs 3 days' ride north of this hall. Ashvale lies. He looked at Avel. 9 days east, Avel said quietly. Through the hollow deep country, past the canyon rim, across the ash. The fortress knows my voice. Its defenses were built to obey me, and some of them will not have heard that the war is over. The vault beneath the Keeper's temple requires my hand to open. The ring is inside. A pause. 9 days there, 9 days back. 3 days to the Sareth. 21 days for a 12-day window. The arithmetic sat on the table like a diagnosis. Then we do not go to Ashvale, Valus said flatly. The numbers do not permit it. We go to the Sareth with 4 grafts, and the healer is the 5th. The lawmaster said so on the road, and we perform the ritual without the ring. 4 grafts and the healer will shape the membrane, Sareth said carefully. But the shape will be incomplete. A 4-note chord instead of 5. The door will open, but it will not hold. A membrane that does not hold is a membrane that weakens, and a membrane that weakens becomes over years, over decades. A wound, Lena finished, waiting to reopen. We'd be building Morvath's architecture all over again, a door that degrades into a hole that becomes a highway, and a century from now some other healer gets grabbed by the wrist at 3 a.m., and the whole cycle starts over. She looked at the shimmer through the great window, at the ghost of her world brightening minute by minute. 4 is a patch, 5 is a cure. I don't do patches. Then the arithmetic requires a different arithmetic, the remembrancer said from her alcove in the dry, precise voice that had navigated the whole war from a tower. The ring must come to the Sareth. The healer cannot go to Ashvale and return in time. Therefore, the ring comes to the healer. The blind face turned toward the one person at the table who had built the fortress and the Keeper's temple and the vault. Is there a way, Deep Keeper? A way that does not require 21 days and the healer's presence? Avel was quiet for a long time. The grey-green eyes were doing the thing Lena had learned to recognize, the internal archaeology, the 3-century dig through his own ruins, searching for the thing he had built and buried and told himself was stored. The vault opens to my hand, he said at last. My hand alone, it was keyed to the Keeper's touch, and the Keeper was me, and whatever else the war has changed, my hand has not. The fortress defenses. He paused, and the pause held 300 years of architecture. Some will obey me still, some will not. The defenses were built to protect what was inside from what was outside, and since the war's end, I am outside. The uncertain voice steadied, finding its footing on the terrain of craft. But I built them, healer. I know every stone, every ward, every kill corridor. I can navigate my own architecture. I can reach the vault. I can bring the ring. But not alone, Doromir said. Not alone. The fortress was built for a sorcerer's power. I am. The grey-green eyes dropped to his own scarred hands, the bare ring finger, the 3 centuries of self-extraction written in the skin. I am no longer what I built it for. I will need an escort, a small one. The fortress punishes intrusion by scale, fewer souls, fewer triggers. And I will need the escort to trust me in the dark, in my own house, where every door knows my name and some of them still mean to answer it. The council was quiet. The singing stone kept its 4 beats beneath the silence. I'll go, said Phelan. Every head turned. The boy soldiers stood at the council's edge, where the guards stood, where the witnesses stood, and his new deep voice carried across the Hall of the Nine with the particular weight of a man who has found the count by accident and intends to follow it wherever it leads. He needs an escort that trusts him in the dark. I've been in the dark with him for 3 weeks, and he hasn't flinched once at the soup, and he's learning the count, and... Phelan looked at Avel, and the look was not trust, exactly, because trust at this stage would have been irresponsible. And I am the one person in this company who has been scared of the dark and come out the other side, and I know what it looks like when someone is walking toward their own worst room. That's what he's doing. That's what Ashvale is. He straightened. The healer taught me the count. The count says, nobody walks the dark alone. Send me. Send us, said Valus from behind the boy, arms folded, flat and unargued. The captain does not send the soldier without the officer, and I swore a bow to the healer's road. The road goes through Ashvale. My bow goes through Ashvale. Lena looked at the two of them, the boy who had found the count on a barricade and the captain who had waited a month for a reason, and felt, in the clinical part of her that charted everything, the specific warmth of a treatment plan falling into place. Alval, Phelan, Valus, and Durham's best road team, she said. 9 days east, the ring, 9 days back. That's 18. 12-day window. You're 6 days short. 5, Alval said. There is a way, an old way, a keeper's road through the deep places, sealed since the falling. It runs from the hollow deep country to the ash in 3 days, not 9. If the road still answers to my hand, the uncertain voice finding its ground. If the road still holds, then the arithmetic becomes 3 days there, 1 day in the fortress, 3 days back, 7 days, 5 days to spare. And if the road doesn't hold? The grey-green eyes came up, and for one breath, the thing underneath 3 centuries of chosen cold looked out, not Morvath, not Alval, but the unnamed space between them where a man was learning to live, and said, then I will have led your people into my own ruin, and the chart will carry it, and the chart does not lie. Noted, Lena said. Phelan, bring the soup. Vilis, bring the bow. Avel, she looked at her strangest patient, her hardest chart, the only person on 2 worlds who could open a vault that held the last piece of the puzzle. Bring yourself home. All of you. That's the prescription. It's not negotiable. Section 3. They split at dawn, because the clock in the shimmer read 4:38, and every minute was a minute of membrane forming, and the company that had been one body since a clearing in Silvarin said its goodbyes the way soldiers say goodbyes, quickly, with the weight in the grip and not the words. The Ashvale team was 7, Alval, Phelan, Valus, and 4 of Durham's hardest road dwarves, carrying field lamps and salt and 7 days' provisions, and the particular silence of people who know they are walking towards someone else's ruin and cannot afford to discuss it. They would descend through the hollow deep country to the Keeper's Road, Aval's sealed highway through the deep places, and ride it east to the ash and enter the fortress and open the vault and bring home the ring that a man had buried 3 centuries ago when later became never and never became war. The Sareth team would ride north, Lena, Doramir, Ithrene, Gazra and her wolves, Sarethiel, the Remembrancer and her stone, to prepare the river, the ritual, and the ground where 5 grafts would meet. 3 days' ride to the holiest water in the world, and then, waiting, for a ring, for a team, for the arithmetic to close. Lena said her goodbyes at the ivory gates, in the shimmer light, with the ghost of a hospital corridor brightening above them like a developing photograph. To Valus, bring them home, Captain, all of them, including the one you don't trust yet. I trust the chart, Valus said, which was, from him, the equivalent of a blood oath, and the chart says he walks toward his worst room. I have watched you walk toward yours, healer, in a throne hall, in a gallery, on a membrane. The walk is the same walk. The captain recognizes it. He paused, and the flat voice did the thing it almost never did. It admitted the personal. Besides, the boy volunteered. Where the boy walks, the bow walks. That is not strategy. That is the only oath I have left worth keeping. To Phelan. The Count, soldier. Whatever happens in that fortress. The Count. The Count is the one thing I have never once dropped, healer. The deep voice, the voice the channel's edge had broken and the war had rebuilt, carried the smile she could hear but not see. Also, I'm bringing extra soup. The man has been eating nothing but field rations and dignity for 3 centuries. Someone needs to feed him properly before he faces his own worst room. And to Aval, her strangest patient, her hardest chart, the man who had been the enemy of the age and was now a recovering elf in borrowed grey, standing at the gate of the city he had infiltrated, about to walk back into the house he had built to contain his grief. Aval, the vault. When you open it, when you find the ring, you're going to be standing in the place where you decided that later meant never. 300 years of everything you became started in that room, and 300 years of everything you're unbecoming will meet you there. She held his grey-green eyes, doctor to patient, across the longest chart in history. I won't be there. Phelan will be there, and Valus, and the Count, and the soup. But I won't be there, and I need you to hear this now, while I am. The room is not the decision. The room is where the decision happened. You are not the man who walked into that vault 3 centuries ago, Avel. You are the man who is walking back. The difference is the whole chart, and the chart does not lie. The old elf looked at her for a long time, and the grey-green eyes were wet, and the wetness was becoming, over the weeks of the road and the war and the recovery, less startling and more simply human, in the sense that transcended species, the sense that meant alive and feeling it, and no longer ashamed of the feeling. The impossible doctor, he said. You make surrender feel like a promotion, and prescriptions feel like poetry. And I have spent 3 centuries being the most eloquent voice in 2 worlds, and you have, in the space of a single war, rendered me inarticulate. He straightened, the tall, thin frame finding briefly the posture of the keeper he had been before the cloak. I will bring the ring home, healer. And when I stand in that vault, I will hear your voice, because your voice is the one thing in my long and regrettable career that I have not yet learned to argue with. That's because I'm right, Lena said. And because arguing with your doctor is a symptom, not a strategy. Go, Avel. The chart is waiting. They left through the eastern gate. 7 souls, 2 lamps, 1 recovering sorcerer, and the future of 2 worlds packed in the satchel beside a bone needle and a 60-year-old grief. And the mountain watched them down the switchbacks until the tears answering pulse, which Doromir held up from the western parapet like a lantern for the departing, was the last light they carried besides their own. The Sareth team rode north that same morning, and the ride was the strangest 3 days of Lena's second life, because it was quiet, and the quiet was not the quiet of approach or of dread. It was the quiet of arrival. The northern foothills of the Kant Peaks descended through pine into meadow, and the meadow ran down to a river valley that opened, on the second day, into the widest, gentlest landscape Lena had seen in either world. Green country, rolling and soft, threaded with streams that all ran north toward a brightness on the horizon that was not sunlight and was not shimmer, but was something she felt in the grafts before she saw it with her eyes. A warmth, a pulling, the way a compass needle feels north. The Sareth, Doromir said, riding beside her. You feel it. The tear has been pulling north since we left the mountain, not hard, asking. The way the cup asked when we approached the undervault, and the fang asked when we entered the canyons. The grafts know their river, healer. They have been away from home for 10,000 years. So have I, Lena said, and looked up at the shimmer and the clock. 5:02 now, the hands crawling through the small hours of her own world's longest night. Everyone's going home this week, Doromir. The question is whether the door stays open after. On the second night, camped in the river valley, with the Sareth's glow on the northern horizon and the shimmer blazing overhead, Lena stood her watch alone, deliberately, for the first time since the company had formed, and did the thing she had been putting off since a lawmaster on a canyon road had gripped her wrist and told her the truth about 4 beats. She put her stethoscope on her own chest. The pulse came through the silver serpent, and it was her pulse, her own, human, 34 years old. And beneath it, inside it, woven through it, the way the golden thread was woven through every river in Ilarion, the deep's own keeping beat. 3, and then 1, not overlaid, not borrowed, constitutional, the way a heartbeat is constitutional, present since before memory, since before the first corridor, since before a carpenter's hand had squeezed a girl's in a white room and given the pattern a shape that both worlds would learn to keep time by. She was not carrying the 5th graft. She was the 5th graft, and the 5th graft was going to stand at the Sareth in 7 days, and the river was going to recognize its own pulse, and the membrane forming in the sky was going to become either a wall or a window, and the difference, the only difference that had ever mattered, was whether the healer brought 4 notes to the river or 5. 4 notes was a chord, 5 notes was a key, and a key, turned in a healed wound, does not lock, it opens. The Keeper's Road opened on the second day, in the deep country south of the Hollow Deep, and Phelan would write in his journal that the opening was the most unsettling thing he had witnessed in a war that had included a membrane and a shore and a god laying down a spear. Avel found it by feel. They had descended through the canyon country's southern shafts, Cleared now, the black water drained, the salt lines dry, the deep roads still and echoing with the particular emptiness of a sick room after discharge. And at the lowest junction, where the mapped roads ended and the unmapped dark began, the former keeper of the deep places laid his scarred hands on a wall of plain stone and spoke in the old tongue, the language the deep had taught its surgeons 10,000 years ago. The stone answered, not with a door, with a recognition. The wall did not open, it remembered. Like a locked phone recognizing a fingerprint, Phelan wrote, reaching for the only metaphor his world of night shifts and barricades could supply. And the remembering rippled through the stone in the deep's own script, the keeping marks that Lena had charted on bodies and walls and pillows, lighting up in golden lines along the seams of what had been, 10,000 years ago, the keeper's own highway, the road between the temples, the arteries of the priesthood, sealed since the falling. It knows me, Aval said, and his voice held something Phelan had not heard in it before. Something that was not shame and was not grief and was not the carefully maintained dignity of a man under permanent clinical supervision. It was wonder. The wonder of a man touching the thing he built before the building went wrong and finding it intact. 10,000 years, and it still knows my hand. The deep does not forget its keepers, even the ones who... He stopped. The golden lines pulsed, patient, waiting. Even the ones who fell. Violis finished, flat and unsentimental, which was, Phelan would note in the journal, the exact right register for a man who needed to hear the sentence completed without comfort. The road is open, Deep Keeper. Walk it. We walk behind. They walked. The Keeper's road was nothing like the deep roads of the canyons or the emberway of the undervault. It was older than both, and it showed, smooth as water-carved glass, lit by the deep's own veins in the stone, wide enough for three and tall enough for Tarian. Built for a people who had once walked between the world's endings as caregivers, as surgeons, as the trusted custodians of every race's dead. The road hummed, not with the deep's post-operative pulse, with something older, something that predated the wound and the war and the whole long catastrophe of the falling. The original frequency of the keeping itself, the note the deep had been singing before anyone taught it to grieve. Aval walked the center of the road with his hands at his sides, palms open, and the golden lines in the walls answered his passing, the way an instrument answers a tuning fork, lighting ahead, dimming behind, the whole highway awakening to its keeper's touch in a rolling wave of recognition that went before them into the dark like a herald. He's crying, Phelan murmured to Veilis, 2 paces behind, watching the tall, thin figure walk the lit road with his palms open and his face wet. Yes, said Veilis. Leave him. Some roads require it. They covered 60 miles on the first day. The road was that smooth, that true, that old, and the deep's veins lit their way like a runway, and nothing moved in the tunnels ahead or behind, and the silence was not the canyon's dread silence or the fever's hunger silence, but a third kind, the silence of an empty ward after the discharge, swept and waiting, and Phelan wrote that the silence missed something. That the road felt like a house whose family had moved out and whose walls still held the shape of the furniture. On the first night, they camped in a keeper's way station, intact, 10,000 years of dust and one set of ancient furnishings preserved by the deep's own dryness. Avel sat at a stone table, not unlike Scalvar's work table, and traced, with one finger, the keeping marks carved into its surface. Words, names, the record of a shift completed. A keeper's log, from the age before the falling. The last entry, Phelan leaned in, and Aval translated in a voice like a man reading his own obituary, written by a friend, read, Keeper Aval reports, all endings attended, all keepings confirmed, the deep is well, shift complete. The date, in the old reckoning, was 60 years before the First War. This was my station, Aval said. This was my table. I wrote this entry, the last one, the night before I cut the ring. He touched the carved words with the same fingers that had touched the membrane, and the wall, and a dead spear. The deep was well, Phelan. I wrote that. And then I went downstairs and extracted my own name, and by the time I came back up, nothing I had written was true anymore. Phelan sat down across the ancient table and set a cup of soup on the keeper's log, because the count was the count, and the soup was the soup, and some medicines are older than medicine, and said, then write a new entry. When we leave, date it today. Whatever the deep is now, post-operative, humming, doing its own rounds, write that. Not because it erases the old one, because the log should know that the keeper came back. Aval looked at the soup, at the boy, at the log, and the 300-year gap between entries. "You are," said the oldest elf in the world, "an impossible soldier." "I learned from an impossible doctor," Phelan said. "Drink the soup. The worst room is tomorrow." Section 4. The keeper's road delivered them to Ashvale on the third morning, and the fortress of fused obsidian stood empty in its ash the way a shed skin stands, holding the shape of what left it. Phelan had imagined fire. He had imagined dread and darkness, and the architecture of evil rendered in stone, the villain's lair of every story he had grown up with, dripping menace, breathing threat. What he found was sadder than all of that. Ashvale was a workshop, a vast, meticulous, obsessively organized workshop, built by a craftsman who had gone wrong, and the wrongness was in every detail. The forging halls where crystals had been cut and extracted, still smelling faintly of ozone and grief, their workbenches arranged with a surgeon's precision. The barracks of the crossing born, row upon row of empty cells, each one identical, each one containing a folded black cloak and nothing else. No personal effects, no marks on the walls, no evidence of individuality surviving the script. And at the fortress's heart, the portal chamber, where the wound between the worlds hung in the dark like a scar in the air, dimmer now, its edges no longer flickering hungrily, but closing, slowly, the membrane forming visibly, a biological process the architecture could not control. "The wound is smaller than I expected," Phelan said, looking at the tear in reality from across the chamber. "It was larger," Aval said quietly. "When I cut it, it filled this room. 300 years of feeding shrank it, every crossing cost it, every stolen word bled it. The wound was never sustainable, boy soldier. It was always eating itself. Even without the healer, it would have sealed in another century. Sealed wrong, scarred shut, two worlds locked apart by biology's own housekeeping." He looked at the dimming portal, and the grey-green eyes held something Phelan filed under the heading "A Craftsman," seeing his masterwork fail and feeling relief instead of grief. "She is right to hurry. But know this, the wound wants to close. It has wanted to close since the hour I cut it. Everything I built, the crystals, the crossings, the architecture, was built to keep it open, to prevent the healing. And now the architecture is empty, and the crystals are rain, and the wound is doing what it has ached to do for 300 years. A pause. "It is the only patient I ever treated that I hope never to see again." Velis, sweeping the chamber with a soldier's eye, said nothing. But his bow came off his shoulder, and the arrow stayed nocked, and the captain walked the fortress the way he walked every unknown ground, expecting the ground to argue. The ground argued on the second floor. The defenses woke in the keeper's corridor, the passage between the public fortress and the sealed temple below, and they woke the way Aval had warned, discriminately. The fortress had been built to obey its keeper. The keeper had left, and the defenses, keyed to a presence that was now simultaneously recognized and unauthorized, did what conflicted architecture does. They panicked. The first ward was a wall of the forged keeping script, Aval's own writing, weaponized, hanging in the corridor like a curtain of burning text, and it read the approaching party the way the remembrancer's stone read a hall, by presence. Aval it knew, and the knowing made it hesitate. The dwarves it did not know, and the hesitation ended. The script wall surged. Derm's road team went flat against the corridor walls, seasoned tunnel professionals, no panic, just geometry, and Velis had an arrow drawn on the burning text before the absurdity of shooting a sentence registered and the bow came down again. "Healer would know what to do with this," he muttered. "The healer is 700 miles away," Phelan said. "We have the count." Aval caught it with his hands. Not with power. He had none left, no crystal, no stolen craft, nothing but the bare knowledge of the author confronting his own text. And the catching was not a block, but a correction. He stood in the burning corridor with the script fire licking his scars and rewrote it, syllable by syllable, his ruined voice speaking the old tongue the way Lena spoke over dying strangers, with the authority of someone who knows the chart better than the chart knows itself. Not with power. He had none left, no crystal, no stolen craft, nothing but the bare knowledge of the author confronting his own text. And the catching was not a block, but a correction. He stood in the burning corridor with the script fire licking his scars and rewrote it, syllable by syllable, his ruined voice speaking the old tongue the way Lena spoke over dying strangers, with the authority of someone who knows the chart better than the chart knows itself. "I wrote you," he said to his own burning ward, palms out, the scars meeting the script that had made them. "I wrote you in grief, and in grief you have stood, and the grief is over, ward. The keeper has returned. The keeper countermands. Stand down." The script wall fought him. 3 centuries of weaponized mourning, coded to protect the wound at all costs, interpreting the keeper's return as either rescue or threat and unable to resolve the ambiguity. And behind it, Phelan could see more wards waking, a corridor's worth of the dead sorcerer's contingencies, stacking up like dominoes about to fall. "Count!" Avel gasped, hands in the fire. "Boy, the count!" Phelan struck his fist on his chest, and the deep voice filled the corridor. 3, and then 1, 3, and then 1, and the script wall shivered. The keeping beat, the deep's own pulse, arriving in the enemy's own architecture through the lungs of a boy soldier who carried it like a marching cadence. And the weaponized grief heard its own mother tongue spoken by a stranger, and the ambiguity resolved, because the deep's rhythm cannot be forged, and cannot be weaponized, and cannot be faked. It is the one frequency in 2 worlds that means only I am here, and I am counting, and the count is real. The script wall dimmed. The wards behind it dimmed. And Avel of the Deep Keepers walked through the corridor of his own worst century with a boy's count, clearing the way ahead of him like a lamp clearing dark water. And every ward that woke to challenge them heard the 4 beats and remembered what it had been before the grief taught it to burn, and stood down, one by one, like soldiers laying down arms to the sound of a ceasefire played in a key they had been homesick for. "Note for the journal," Phelan said, hoarse, after the 7th ward in a row had folded at the count's touch. "The count disarms a building." "The count," said Avel, moving through his own ruins with tears on his face and his hands still smoking. "Disarms everything. That is why the healer carries it. That is why the deep grew it. It is the one instrument in 2 worlds that has never once been used to harm." The vault was at the bottom of everything, beneath the fortress, beneath the temple, beneath 10,000 years of keeper's architecture, and the door was the simplest thing in Ashvale, a single slab of unworked stone, no script, no ward, no craft, just a handprint, worn smooth by 60 years of a young keeper's palm, pressed into the rock at the height of a man who had not yet learned to be a monster. Avel placed his hand in the print. The fit was exact. 3 centuries of war and grief and crystal craft and the slow dismantling of everything he had been, and his hand had not changed size. The door opened. The vault was small, keeper-sized, not sorcerer-sized, a round room of bare stone, unlit, undecorated, holding a single shelf and a single object on the shelf, undisturbed for 300 years. The ring was silver, plain, and warm. Warm the way the grafts were warm. Warm the way the deep's own rivers were warm, now that the circulation had returned. A simple band, carrying a single mark on its inner surface. A name in the keeping script, the first word Avel had ever cut from the language of the deep. His own name, the prototype. The proof of concept that had made every crystal, every cloak, every stolen scream, every year of the war possible. Avel picked it up, and the ring knew him the way the road had known him, and the vault filled with light. Not golden, not teal, not red. Clear, the light of a keeping word coming home to the hand that had cut it. The original wound recognizing the original surgeon. And the 5th graft, the last piece. The note that had been missing from the chord since a man had buried his own name and called it later, sang in the deep keeper's palm, like a heart remembering how to beat. "Hello," said Avel, to his own name, to the 60-year-old grief that had started everything, to the later that had finally arrived. "I am sorry I was away." Phelan stood in the vault's doorway and watched the oldest elf in the world hold a silver ring and weep, and wrote in the journal nobody at home would believe, the truest sentence of the war. He found the room where everything went wrong, and the room had been waiting for him to come back and make it right, and the ring fit. They climbed back through the disarmed fortress in half the time, the wards standing open now, the script walls dim, the whole architecture of 3 centuries exhaling. And at the keeper's way station, on the road home, Avel stopped at the ancient log table and took the bone stylus from his satchel and carved, beneath the 300-year gap, in the keeping script he had once used to extract and now used to record. Keeper Avel reports, returned, ring recovered, deep post-operative, circulation restored, wound healing. Attending physician, Dr. Lena Marlowe, human, Other shore. Shift. He paused. The stylus hovered. Then, shift, resuming. Phelan read it over his shoulder and said nothing, and put a cup of soup beside the entry, and the keeper's road lit gold before them all the way west. 700 miles west, at the same hour, Lena Marlowe stood at the bank of the holy river Sareth, and felt the deep rise to meet her through the soles of her boots. The Sareth was not what the maps had promised. The maps had drawn a river, blue, winding, bordered by pilgrimage sites and ancient crossings. What Lena found, coming down through the northern meadows on the third morning, was a river that had changed. The healing of the wound, the clearing of the fever, the return of the deep's circulation through every capillary of two worlds. All of it had surfaced here, at the place where the keeping came closest to the sky, and the Sareth had answered by becoming what it had always been underneath the cartography. Not a river running through a valley, but the deep itself, risen, breathing, glowing with the golden light she had first seen through 40 feet of fen ice, running broad and slow and luminous through a valley that smelled of every river she had ever crossed, on both worlds, at once. She knelt at its bank the way she had knelt at every bedside, one knee, healer's distance, and placed her stethoscope on the water, and the pulse that came through the silver serpent was the pulse she had heard on a shore at the bottom of everything, and in her own chest at midnight on a canyon road, and in every cup of water and every drop of rain, since a carpenter's hand had first taught her the count, 3, and then 1, 3, and then 1. I know you, she said, to the river, to the deep, to the patient she had been treating since a white room and 9 minutes and a lamp that would not go out. I've known you my whole life. You're the pulse, and the pulse is the count, and the count is the keeping, and the keeping is you, and you've been in my stethoscope since the first day I wore it. She touched the beads at her throat, drum, salt, ember, olive seed, silver leaf, and the 4 grafts at her body answered the river's glow, and the river answered the grafts, and the whole valley hummed. 4 of 5, she said. The 5th is coming, 7 days if the road holds. And when it arrives, I'm going to stand in your water with everything you gave to every people who ever loved you, and I'm going to ask you to do the thing you should have done 10,000 years ago, the thing that would have prevented all of this. Her voice did the wobble, and the river heard it. I'm going to ask you to share, not just the keeping, not just the visiting, the door, a membrane, not a wall, 2 worlds, connected, through a wound that heals into a window. And on the other side of that window, there's a clock, and a coffee, and a mother I need to call, and a fence that isn't finished. The Sareth ran gold, and the shimmer above it blazed, and the clock in the ghost corridor read 5:31, and the dawn of 2 worlds crept closer, and somewhere east, on a keeper's road lit by the deep's own veins, a boy soldier and a captain and 4 dwarves were running west with a silver ring, and the future of everything in a satchel. Section 5. They ran the keeper's road west like a pulse through a vein. The road answered Aval now without hesitation, the wards disarmed, the way stations open, the deep's golden veins lighting ahead of the team in a rolling wave that Phelan, in his journal, called the road breathing us home. 3 days east had become the arithmetic of everything, 3 days back, then the ride north to the Sareth, and then, whatever happened at a holy river when a healer who was her own 5th graft stood in the water with 4 others and asked the oldest living thing to share. They ran light and they ran fast, and the ring travelled in Aval's palm, not in a satchel, because the old keeper had discovered, an hour out of the vault, when the road's veins dimmed briefly and he'd closed his hand around the silver band and they blazed back to full, that the 5th graft was a key to the keeper's highway in the most literal sense. It was the original access credential, the prototype that had opened every door, and with it in his grip, the road did not merely allow them. It carried them, stone flowing smooth beneath their feet, at a pace no overland march could match, the deep's own infrastructure recognizing its oldest instrument and expediting delivery. We are inside its mail system, Durham observed on the second day, watching the walls blur. The deep is posting us west. I have seen the undervault's ore carriages move slower. Bayless said nothing. Violus ran with his bow in his hand and his eyes ahead, because the road might be breathing them home, but the captain trusted architecture the way he trusted everything, professionally, and with 1 arrow knocked. On the second night, at the way station where Aval had written his new log entry, the ring did something unexpected. Aval set it on the stone table beside the keeper's log, gently, the way you set down a patient's chart. and the ring sang, not loudly, a single sustained note, silver and clear, that travelled through the stone of the table and into the deep veins in the walls, and out, west, through miles of Keeper's Road, and then through the ordinary stone beyond it, the note threading through the deep the way the remembrance's relay threaded through the seed stone, a message, aimed, travelling. What did it say? Phelan asked, watching the walls glow in the note's wake. Avel listened to the fading resonance with the tilted concentration of a man hearing his own language spoken for the first time in centuries. It said coming. It told the other four. The tear, the cup, the fang, the olive, they know the ring is on its way, and, he paused, and the grey-green eyes widened slightly. They answered. All four. I can hear them, boy soldier. Through the stone, the chord is assembling. And the fifth note? Phelan asked, because the Count had taught him that the question that matters is always the one nobody asks. The fifth, said Avel quietly, has been singing since the day she was born. The four are tuning to her. At the Sareth, the preparations were a ritual unlike anything the loremasters had in their 10,000-year library, because the ritual they were preparing for had never been performed, not once. Not in the memory of the stone, not in the songs of the harpers, not in the deep's own kept history. The 5 grafts had never stood together at the river since the morning they were given, and on that morning there had been no wound, no war, no membrane forming in a sky that was learning to be a window. The ritual was new, which meant, the remembrancer said, with the paper-dry practicality that had navigated a war from a tower, that they would have to invent it. The stone sings, the old elf said, sitting at the river's bank with her clouded sphere humming its 4-beat improvisation. It has been singing since the flowers opened, in the keeping's own language, in the Count's own rhythm. I have spent 3 days listening, healer, and I will tell you what the stone is singing, because the stone does not lie, and what it says is both simpler and more terrifying than any ritual the lore masters could have composed. The blind face turned to Lena. It says, stand in the water, all 5. And let the river remember what it was before the wound was cut. That's it? That is everything. The stone is very clear. No chance, no positioning, no reagents, no ancient formulae. Stand, hold the grafts, let the river do what rivers do, which is flow, healer, and carry, and connect. The ritual is not a ceremony. It is a reunion. 5 pieces of the deep, separated for 10,000 years, returning to the body they were cut from, in the presence of the pulse that was grown to conduct them. The paper-dry voice softened, as it did only at moments of genuine awe. You are the conductor, child, not the ceremony. Stand in the river, and the river will know what to do with you. It has been waiting 10,000 years for this particular appointment. The valley itself had become, in the 3 days of waiting, a gathering place that the deep seemed to be arranging without consulting anyone. The golden light in the Sareth's water attracted attention the way the undervault's lamp constellation had. Travellers appeared on every road, pilgrims, wanderers, unbecome making their slow way north, and ordinary people of every race who had heard the river's singing and followed the singing to its source. By the second day, the Sareth's banks held hundreds. By the third, thousands, camped in the meadows, drawn by something none of them could name and all of them could feel. Gazra's wolves patrolled the perimeter with the professional discomfort of soldiers guarding a venue they could not classify. It is not an army. The first Fang reported to Lena on the second evening, with the specific tone of a woman whose entire career had been built on distinguishing threats from non-threats and who had just encountered a third category. It is not a pilgrimage. It is not a festival. They are coming to the water, healer, every kind, every age, some of them walking days, and when they arrive, they kneel at the bank and put their hands in the river and cry, and they cannot explain why, and my wolves cannot tell them to stop because the wolves are doing it too. The deep is calling them, Sareth said, from the river's edge, where she stood with her bare feet in the current, more solid every day as the between thinned and the prophet became, degree by degree, a person standing on one side instead of a ghost standing in the middle. Not calling, inviting. It has never been able to do this before. The wound kept its voice small, its circulation weak. Now the circulation is back, and it is doing what it was made to do, reaching every surface, telling every water drinker in 2 worlds that the door is opening, and that the opening will be beautiful, and that they are welcome to watch. They are going to watch the ritual, Lena said. They are going to be the ritual, Sareth corrected gently. A reunion witnessed is a reunion shared. The deep does not perform for an audience healer. The deep includes everyone at the river. When the 5 grafts stand in the water, will be inside the membrane's field, will feel it form, will see the window open, will touch, for one held breath, the other world. The glass eyes, almost entirely one-directional now, fixed on Lena. You will not be alone in the water. You have never, since the night a woman grabbed your wrist, been alone in anything. Ithren, working the makeshift camp's medical station, because where thousands gather, blisters gather faster, found Lena at dusk on the 2nd day and shared a cup of river water and the news from the canyon relay. Taraksai sends word, the unbecome intake is stable, the shaft drums hold, and the king of the canyons formally requests a seat at the river. He is riding north with Kor and 50 wolves, and he carries, the pass healer smiled, countrywomanly, 300 salt pouches for the witnesses who cry. He says, the canyons come prepared for everything, including grief. Skalvar, riding south from the undervault with Durm's 2nd patrol, he carries the cup's empty twin, the vessel Deepfather held for 11 years, and says it is the undervault's witness gift, an empty cup at the river, to be filled by whatever the river gives. The ice folks' way of saying, we are ready to receive. The whole world was coming to the river, and the river, golden and humming, ran its 4-beat count through a valley that smelled of every water on 2 worlds, and waited. Lena looked at the golden water and the shimmer blazing above it, brighter now, the hospital corridor visible in full detail, the fluorescent panels sharp, a crash cart parked against a ghost wall, and the clock. 5:47. The membrane was forming along the shimmer's edges, visible now, a thickening, the way a scab thickens at a wound's margins, the biological process of 2 worlds separation, advancing minute by minute. In the shimmer's center, the window was still clear, still thin, still open, but the opening was shrinking, the margins creeping inward, and the arithmetic was the arithmetic. The ring team would arrive in 3 days. The membrane would seal in 7. 4 days of margin, less than she'd had for any surgery since this whole impossible shift began. Doromir. She found him at the river's edge, where he stood every evening now, holding the tear under the current, feeling the 4-note chord assemble across the miles. The shimmer, the clock. When Aval arrives with the ring and we stand in the river, if the membrane works, if the wound becomes a window instead of a wall, the window opens to my world, to the hospital, to the minute I left. She took his hand, the hand that had been offered palm up in a clearing a lifetime ago. I need you to understand what that means. It means you can go home, he said, and come back, through a door that stays open. If it works, if 5 notes are enough, if the river does what the stone says it will do. She looked at their joined hands, and at the tear pulsing between them, and at the 2 moons, and the shimmer, and the ghost of a world she had left at 2:58 on a night that had lasted a season and a war. And if it doesn't, if 4 notes aren't enough to hold the membrane and 5 are too late, then the window scars shut with me on this side, and the clock keeps ticking over there, and a mother calls on Sunday, and nobody answers, and the fence. The fence will be finished, Doromir said, with the absolute certainty of a man who has decided that fences are within his range of competencies, and the dawn on a mountain smile. Whatever side of whatever window we stand on, Lena, fences will be finished. That is the promise, not of a king. Of the man the king is learning to be, who knows a Tuesday when he sees one and intends to see many. She kissed him, at the bank of the river, at the end of the world, with the shimmer blazing, and the clock ticking, and the deep humming beneath them, and the kiss tasted of river water, and cold coffee, and the specific impossible flavor of 2 worlds deciding, at the very last minute, not to let go of each other. In the world she was not letting go of, the night shift at St. Aldrich's Hospital had entered the territory that night shifts enter when the strange has been going on long enough to acquire a schedule. The puddle came back every 40 minutes, the same threshold, the same warm glow, the same olive smell. The duty nurse, Rodriguez, night shift veteran, 17 years of the 11 to 7, had stopped reporting it after the 3rd occurrence and started timing it, because 17 years of night shifts had taught her that the unexplainable, properly documented, becomes data, and data is the night shift worker's only real currency. At 5:52, the puddle did something new. It stayed. It did not evaporate, did not drain, did not respond to the mop. It sat on the threshold of the emergency bay, warm and faintly luminous, and, Rodriguez noted, with the clinical detachment of a woman who had once watched a patient code and recover 3 times in the same night and filed all 3 as separate incidents. It was larger, wider, as if whatever was producing it had learned that the threshold was the right place and was now testing how much of itself could fit through. Rodriguez knelt beside the puddle, alone in the corridor at 5:53 in the morning, and did the thing that no protocol in any hospital manual covered, and that every night shift worker in history would have recognized as correct. She spoke to it. "I don't know what you are," she said, to the warm water on the linoleum, in the fluorescent light, in the hospital where a doctor had vanished, and a patient had dissolved, and the ash on a pillow had smelled of endings. "But if you're looking for someone, she's not here. She walked out of basics at 2:58 and she didn't come back, and I've been covering her patients since 3 o'clock, and I'm very tired, and you are glowing on my floor." The puddle pulsed. Once. Warm. The way a held hand pulses when the holder is trying to say something the throat cannot manage. Rodriguez looked at it for a long time. Then she stood and went to the supply closet and came back with a clean towel and laid it beside the puddle, not on it, beside it, the way you lay a blanket beside a patient who is cold but will not ask. "Whatever you are," she said, "you can stay until end of shift. After that it's day crew's problem." The puddle stayed. And at 5:54, from somewhere very far away and very close, the night shift nurse of St. Aldrich's Hospital heard. She would never report this. It would live in her and never leave. 4 beats, faint, rhythmic, coming up through the floor. 3, and then 1. Section 6. They came out of the east on the 6th day, running. Lena was at the river when she felt them arrive, not saw. Felt through the 4 grafts at her body a harmonic disturbance in the chord that had been assembling for a week, a 5th frequency entering the field from the east, like a tuning fork struck in the next room. The tear flared, the cup blazed, the fang vibrated at her belt so hard the leather hummed, the olive seed at her throat went warm as a held hand. She turned east and saw, cresting the last meadow ridge before the Sareth valley, 7 figures, running, lit from below by the deep's golden veins in the ground, and in the lead figure's raised fist, catching the morning sun and the shimmer light and the deep's own glow all at once, a silver ring, burning like a star. "Healer," Phelan's voice, wrecked and radiant, carrying across the valley with the lungs the white throat had almost taken. "Healer. The ring sings, and we can't make it stop, and Aval is crying again, and Velas says to tell you the arithmetic closes." The valley heard. The thousands at the riverbanks heard, the pilgrims, and the wanderers, and the unbecome, and the ordinary people who had followed the singing water to its source, and a sound went through them that Lena had heard twice before in her second life, once in an amphitheater of 10,000 elves, and once in a gallery of 10,000 dwarves. A sound like a world deciding, all at once, what it believed. Doramir was beside her, Gazra was behind her. Ithren was already counting the incoming and reaching for her satchel, because incoming was incoming, and 7 people who had run a keeper's highway for 3 days needed water and rest, and, in at least one case, soup. The team reached the valley floor. Durm's dwarves were grey with road dust and grinning. Velis looked like he had not slept in 3 days, and did not intend to start. And Aval. Phelan reached Lena first, and the embrace was the embrace of a boy soldier who has been trusted with the most important errand in the history of 2 worlds and has not dropped it, and the first thing he said, before the ring, before the report, before the briefing, was, he wrote a new log entry, "Healer." In the keeper's station, shift resuming. "I need you to know that, before anything else, because it's the best line I've ever read, and I watched him write it." "That," said Velis, arriving behind him, dust grey and flat, "is the boy's professional assessment. My professional assessment is, the road held, the ring sings, and the former enemy of the age navigated his own ruin without killing any of us, which I am filing under progress and reserving judgment on everything else." The scarred jaw shifted. "Also, the boy was magnificent. Enter it in whatever record you keep, Healer. He found the Count on a barricade, and he carried it through a fortress. I would follow that voice into any dark on either world. That is my testimony, and I am not accustomed to giving it, and I would prefer not to be asked about it again." Phelan went very still, and then very red, and then pretended, with heroic commitment, to be interested in the river. "And Avel," Avel walked to Lena across the last 100 meters of meadow with the ring in his open palm, and the fifth graft sang to the other four with a clarity that made every person at the river stop what they were doing and turn, the way every silver-leafed olive in the Tarian's grove had turned, because 5 notes of a chord that had been separated for 10,000 years were standing, at last, within arm's reach of each other, and the chord was completing itself, whether anyone conducted it or not. "I brought it home," Avel said, and set the ring in Lena's hand, and the 5-note chord struck. The sound was not a sound. It was felt, through the ground, through the water, through the bodies of every living thing in the valley, and, Lena suspected, through the bodies of every living thing on the surface of the world, because the deep's circulation carried the note the way a heartbeat carries blood, everywhere, all at once, to the smallest capillary. The Sareth's golden water blazed white for 3 heartbeats. The shimmer overhead flared so bright the ghost corridor became, for one instant, as vivid as the valley itself. Fluorescent panels, linoleum floor, the clock reading 6:11, and a woman in scrubs kneeling beside a puddle of warm water on a threshold, looking up as if she had heard something. Then the 5 notes settled, not fading, integrating, the way an orchestra integrates when the last instrument joins the tuning. And the world breathed out, and the river rang gold again, and the chord became a hum, and the hum became a pulse, and the pulse was the count, and the count was Lena's, and Lena's was the deep's, and the deep's was everything. "Tomorrow," said Sareth from the bank, translucent and smiling, the smile she was wearing more often now, the smile of a woman stepping out of a 300-year penance 1 degree at a time. "Tomorrow, healer. The membrane's margin gives us until noon. At noon the scar formation crosses the point of no return, and the window becomes a wall. Before noon, the glass eyes, burning with 1 direction's worth of light, and nothing left to hide. You stand in the river, and the river remembers, and 2 worlds decide what they are to each other." "Before noon," Lena said. She looked down at her hands, both of them full now, the right holding the ring, the left resting on the cup's warm rim, the stethoscope at her throat, and the beads beside it, and the tear blazing at the throat of the king beside her, and the fang at her belt. And the hands were steady, because the hands had always been steady, because the steadiness was the count, and the count was the graft, and the graft was the deep, and the deep was her, and she was the deep, and the circle had, at last, closed. "Before noon," she said again, "everyone should sleep." Nobody slept. The vigil at the Sareth lasted the whole last night, and it was not a vigil anyone had organized. It was a vigil the world organized for itself. Fires lit along both banks for a mile in each direction, thousands of small flames held by thousands of hands, the same gesture the undervault had made on the night of the descent, a constellation, built from below, by people who understood that whatever happened at the river in the morning was going to happen to them, to their water, to their dead, to the kept and the keeping, and the whole invisible architecture of grief and love that ran beneath every surface they had ever stood on. The peoples were all there now. Doromir's elves had come down from the mountain, Kale the steward, with a company of the 9 houses, and the healers of the middle terrace, and the children of the lower terraces, and at their head, carried in the litter she insisted she did not need, the remembrancer with her singing stone. Skalvar had arrived at dusk with the undervault's witness gift, Harrick's empty cup placed at the river's edge, open to the sky. Tariksai had come in at moonrise with Kor and 50 wolves and 300 salt pouches distributed without comment to anyone who was crying, which was almost everyone. And from the west, visible by their grove's distant golden glow, the Tarian, a delegation of 12, standing at the valley's edge, kneeling, silent, signing to each other in the hand language that had no word for enemy, and had, since the healer's visit, acquired one new sign that Sareth translated as, the one who counts. Lena walked the vigil all night because the vigil was a ward and she was the night shift and the night shift walks. She walked past the fires and was recognized, not as a hero, not as a savior. The recognition was quieter and more devastating than that. She was recognized as the doctor, the one who would be working in the morning, the one whose hands would hold the thing that mattered. And the people at the fires did the thing that patients do on the night before surgery. They looked at her, and the looking was the oldest medicine in the world, and it said, without words, in every language, "We trust your hands. Go to work." At one fire, she found Terenil, who was not asleep because Terenil was never asleep when history was happening, and the boy looked up at her from his blanket with the wide, serious eyes of a child who has kept account for a whole war and is now about to watch the Count do the thing the Count was for. "Is it going to work?" he asked, not scared, calibrating, the way his healer calibrated, because 6-year-olds learn what they see, and what Terenil had seen, for a season and a war, was a woman who assessed before she acted. "I'm going to do everything I can to make it work," Lena said, because she owed him honesty and had since the day he showed her her drum. "And if it works, the sky becomes a window instead of a wall, and both worlds stay connected, and the deep keeps sharing, and the kept can be visited, and—" She touched the drum bead at her throat, the first token, the one that started everything. "And I can go see my mom, Terenil, and come back. And if it doesn't work, then the window scars shut, and I stay here forever, and my mom doesn't know what happened to me, and—" The wobble, the honest one, in front of the honest child, and there's a fence that doesn't get finished. Terenil considered this with the full weight of 6 years. Then he reached into his blanket and produced, with the ceremony of a child presenting a treasure, a small carved drum bead, identical to the one he had given her at the Ivory Gates a lifetime ago, a spare. "In case the first one gets tired," he said. Lena tied it beside the others: drum, salt, ember, olive seed, silver leaf, and now a second drum, a spare because the Count keeps the count, and kissed the top of his head and walked on, and the fires burned, and the vigil held. At the river's edge, in the deepest hour of the night, the Sareth's golden water showed her, briefly, without her asking, the way the deep showed things now, gently, as a gift. 2 figures on a glowing shore, hand in hand. Her father, broad-shouldered, laughing, and beside him, slight and silver-haired, with her arm through his, the way old friends' arms link. Rowan and Lyriel, kept and content, watching the river from below, waiting for morning. "Good eye, my girl," said the water, in a carpenter's voice. "Now finish the shift." She found Abel at the river's edge at the last hour, sitting with his bare feet in the golden water, the ring on his finger for the first time in 300 years. He was not crying. He was past crying, into the country beyond it, the still, exhausted, wide-open country of a man who has walked through his worst room and come out the other side and discovered that the other side has a river in it. "The ritual," he said, without looking up. "I will not be in the water. You know this." "I know." The 5 grafts required a conductor, and the conductor was Lena, and the 4 object grafts would be held by the 4 peoples who had carried them. Avel's graft was the ring, but the ring was his name, cut from his body, and the body that had cut it was the body that needed to return it. "You'll be on the bank. You'll put the ring in the water yourself, hand it to the river, the way you handed it to me. The deep receives it from the hand that took it. That's the circle, Avel. That's the whole chart. And if the deep—" The uncertain voice, smaller than she had ever heard it. "If the deep does not want my hand?" "The deep has wanted your hand for 10,000 years," Lena said, and sat beside him, doctor and patient, at the river's edge, on the last night of the longest shift. "You were its keeper, Avel, its surgeon, its most gifted student. It refused your petition, and you burned its house down, and it has spent 300 years grieving you, not the wound, not the war you, the way my father grieved me from ashore, proudly and painfully, and without once giving up on the idea that the door would someday open. The deep does not reject its keepers, even the ones who fell." She touched his scarred hand, the ring finger, especially the ones who came back. The river ran gold between their feet, and somewhere in the gold, very far down, the deep's own pulse answered, 3, and then 1. And the old keeper who had been the enemy of the age closed his eyes, and the closing was not sleep and was not surrender, it was rest. The first rest in 300 years that had not been stolen from the Count. Dawn came, and the shimmer blazed, and the clock in the ghost corridor read 6:44, and the membrane's margins had crept to within a hand's breadth of the center, and the window was a circle now, a circle of thinness in a thickening sky, a last clear pane in a frosting glass, and through it, vivid as a painting, the emergency bay of St. Aldrich's Hospital, and a puddle on a threshold that had not evaporated, and a woman in scrubs who had laid a towel beside it and was sitting, cross-legged, on the linoleum with a cup of cold coffee, waiting. Noon. The scar seals at noon. and the healer of two worlds stood at the bank of the oldest river, with 5 grafts singing and a world watching and a clock ticking and a mother who didn't know yet that the fence was about to be finished, and said, to the dawn, to the company, to the deep, to the kept and the living and the water that connected them all. All right, last round, everyone to their stations, 3 and then 1, 3 and then 1, 3 and then... Section 7. She walked into the river at 11:07 because the clock in the shimmer said 11:07 and the membrane's margins were a hand's breadth from center, and no healer in the history of two worlds had ever had a more precisely timed appointment. The water received her the way it had received her at a shore at the bottom of everything, not as a stranger, not as a visitor, but as a part of itself that had been walking around on legs for 34 years and had finally come home. It was warm. It was aware. It was so full of the deep's attention that stepping into it felt less like entering a river and more like being remembered. Every cell of her body catalogued and confirmed and welcomed by something that had known her longer than she had known herself. She waded to the center, where the current was waist-deep and the golden glow was brightest, and she stood, and the count, her count, the deep's count, the count that had cleared a fortress and held a city and healed a membrane and taught two worlds to keep time. The count settled into the river like a key settling into a lock it was made for. Bring them, she said. Doramir came first. The king of the Kant peaks waded into the Sareth with the tear of the first tree in his hands, lifted from his neck, held before him like an offering, the crystal that had pulsed at his father's throat for 400 years and his own for a season and a war, and he set it in the water at Lena's right hand, and the river sang one note as the first graft came home. Skalvar came second. The deep king of the undervault carried Harrick's empty cup, not the golden graft cup that was already at Lena's back, but the twin, the witness vessel, and in his other hand the golden cup itself, filled with the deep's own light from the shore at the bottom of everything. He set the cup in the water at Lena's left hand, and the river sang its second note, and the two notes harmonized, and the harmony traveled upstream and downstream at once, and every tributary of the Sareth, for 100 miles in both directions, began to glow. Tariq's eye came third. The king of the canyons waded in with the dropped shoulder stride of a fortress fording weather, and the fang of the first morning was in his grip, not on a chain, in his teeth, bitten down the way his people had bitten down since the first morning, carried to the water in the manner of the canyons, held, not surrendered. He set the fang in the water at Lena's feet, and the river sang its third note, and the chord deepened, and the ground beneath the river hummed, and on both banks thousands felt it through the soles of their feet, and went quiet. Sarathiel brought the fourth. The prophet who had spent 300 years in the crack walked into the water she had voted to lock 10,000 years ago, and she was no longer translucent. The between had thinned to nothing around her, the crack closed by the healing it had been made by the wounding. And what walked into the Sareth was an elf woman, old and real and present, carrying the golden olive of the Tarian in both hands, the way you carry the last apology of a very long penance. She set it in the water before Lena, and the river sang its fourth note, and the chord was an open hand missing one finger, and the whole valley ached with the almost. And at the bank, at the edge of the river, on the dry stone, in the exact position of a man who has walked to the threshold of everything and cannot cross it alone, Aval of the Deep Keepers knelt with the silver ring on his palm. The margins of the membrane were closing. In the shimmer overhead, the scar tissue crept toward the center of the window, and the clock read 11:31, and the circle of clear sky was shrinking, and through it, the emergency bay of street. Aldrich's was a painting being slowly, biologically framed out. Avel, Lena said, from the center of the river, with 4 grafts singing around her, and the deep's whole attention coursing through the water she stood in. The ring. It's time. The old keeper looked at the ring, at the river, at the water he had once tended, and then betrayed, and then spent 3 centuries punishing, and then laid down his spear before, and then walked back to through his own ruin, carrying soup and account, and the stubborn companionship of a boy soldier who had found the rhythm on a barricade. I am afraid, he said, and the saying was the bravest thing the war had produced, because 300 years of the age's most dangerous being had never once, to anyone's knowledge, admitted fear, and saying it now, In front of kings and armies and the population of a world was the final ward falling, the last script wall dimming, the architecture of chosen cold collapsing down to the bare foundation of a man. "I know," Lena said. "I was afraid the first time I put a stethoscope on a patient, and every time since. The fear is the proof you're paying attention, Avel. Give me the ring." He reached forward. The river reached back, not with a wave, not with a hand, with warmth, the golden glow intensifying at the bank where his scarred fingers hovered over the water, the deep recognizing the hand that had once been its finest instrument and saying, in the only language it had ever spoken, the language of the keeping itself, "Welcome home, keeper. We have missed you." Avel set the ring in the water, the fifth note struck, the chord completed, and the world changed key. There was no explosion, no cataclysm, no cinematic release of light and sound. That was the thing every witness at the Sareth would struggle to explain afterward, because the world had trained them to expect climax, and what they got was something older and stranger and more devastating. Resolution. The 5 notes found each other in the golden water and became one note, and the one note was the count, 3, and then 1. And the count traveled the river, and the river was the deep, and the deep was every river, and the note went everywhere, through every capillary of 2 worlds at once, through the fen and the ice and the canyons and the groves and the ash and the stone and the pipes of a hospital in a city that did not believe in elves, and every surface that had ever held water rang with the frequency of coming home. The Sareth rose, not in flood, in presence. The golden water lifted 6 inches, a foot, and the lift was not hydraulic but organic, the river standing up the way the kept stood on the shore, the way Lena's father had stood in the shallows, luminous and whole, the deep itself, surfacing through its oldest expression, rising to meet the 5 droplets it had given away 10,000 years ago, and was now receiving back from the hands that had loved them. And the wound, the tear in the air that hung in the ash country, dimmer and dimmer, closing on its own biological schedule, opened, not wider, not deeper, differently. The scar formation stopped, the margins stopped creeping, and the tissue between them, the tissue that had been choosing, minute by minute, between wall and window, felt the 5-note chord arrive through the deep's circulation, and the chord said, "membrane," and the tissue listened, and the wound began, at 11:41 on the morning of 2 worlds, to heal the way the healer had healed it, not by closing, but by becoming permeable. By learning to be a surface that separated and connected at the same time. A skin, a window, a door that opened from both sides. The shimmer blazed. The ghost corridor became real. Not a ghost, real, as vivid as the valley, as solid as the river, the fluorescent panels, the linoleum, the clock on the wall reading 6:41 in the morning of the other world, and the emergency bay doors standing open, and through them, through the membrane, through the healed wound, through the window between the worlds, a breeze, warm, smelling of antiseptic and old coffee and the particular institutional staleness that Lena's whole body recognized the way the deep recognized the ring. Home, both of them, at the same time. "The window is open," Sareth said, standing in the water, no longer between anything, tears running down a face that was fully, finally, on one side. "The membrane holds. It will hold, healer. The 5-note chord is self-sustaining. The deep's own circulation maintains it the way a body maintains a healed membrane. The door is open." The glass eyes, clear now, looking one direction. Both sides. On the bank, the thousands were silent. Then Terranil's small fist struck his chest. Drums, drums, and the valley answered, the way the mountain had answered, the way the undervault had answered, the way the canyons had answered, with the count rolling through the peoples of the world, like the deep itself, like the river, like the pulse of everything that was connected and kept and alive. And in the emergency bay of St. Aldrich's Hospital, Nurse Rodriguez, who had been sitting on the linoleum beside a warm puddle for 6 hours, waiting, with a cold coffee and a towel and the patience of the night shift, stood up, because the puddle was glowing, and the glow was spreading, and the emergency bay doors were open, and through them came a breeze that smelled of river water, and pine, and cold mountain air, and something golden she had never smelled before, and would never forget, and the breeze was warm, and the breeze carried. She heard it, through the linoleum, through the floor, through the foundations of a building that stood on pipes, that stood on water, that stood on the same deep as every other water in every other world. 4 beats, 3, and then 1. And then, through the open door, through the window, through the healed wound between two worlds, walking on water that glowed and floors that hummed and the bridge that a healer had built out of a carpenter's handshake and a stethoscope and the longest shift in history, a figure appeared, small, blonde, green-eyed, wearing a borrowed cloak over a white coat, with a stethoscope around her neck and 7 beads on a cord at her throat, soaking wet from the waist down, radiant, weeping, arriving. "Rodriguez," said Dr. Lena Marlowe, standing in the emergency bay of her own hospital for the first time in a season and a war and 2 funerals and 1 surgery on the foundation of 2 worlds. "I understand you've been covering my patients." "Since 3 o'clock," said the night shift nurse, very steadily, because the night shift is the night shift and steady is the only real thing. "Your coffee's cold." "It was cold when I left," Lena said, and laughed. And the laugh went through the window in both directions, and was heard in both worlds, and the deep that kept everything, the deep that shared now, the deep that had grown a healer the way a grove grows an olive, and waited 10,000 years for her to stand in the water and remind it what it was, the deep kept the laugh, because the laugh volunteered. Section 8. The linoleum was cold under her wet boots, and the fluorescent light was the ugliest, most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Lena stood in the emergency bay of St. Aldrich's Hospital at 6:41 in the morning, dripping river water onto industrial flooring, and the world she had left at 2:58 one impossible night ago received her the way the deep received its grafts, by recognizing her before she recognized herself. The smell hit first, antiseptic and floor wax, and the particular staleness of recycled air that she had breathed for 12 years and never once noticed until she'd spent a season breathing pine and mountain wind and the sweet electric air of a forest with golden veins. Then the sound, the hum, the fluorescent hum, the building's own pulse, the mechanical heartbeat of a hospital that did not know it stood on the same water as a river in another world, but knew it now because the window was open, and through the open emergency bay doors, the deep's golden glow was pooling on the linoleum like spilled sunlight, and the hum had acquired, very faintly, a harmonic. 4 beats, in the pipes, in the floor, in the bones of the building. Dr. Marlowe. Rodriguez had not moved from the threshold. The night nurse looked at her, at the borrowed cloak, the stethoscope, the 7 beads, the river water, with the expression of a professional who has just watched the universe prove her incident reports correct and is experiencing neither surprise nor satisfaction, but simply the grim vindication of good documentation. "It's been 3 hours and 43 minutes. Your patients are stable. The one in Bay 4 needs a re-eval on her potassium, and there's a message from administration about the missing persons report, and—" Rodriguez stopped and looked at the golden water on the linoleum and at the window in the sky visible through the open doors and at the other world shimmering in the morning air. "And I am going to need a very long debrief, Dr. Marlowe, at some point, when you're ready." "Rodriguez." Lena's voice did the thing it did, the wobble, the honest one, the one she had spent 12 years disciplining and 2 worlds learning to permit. 3 hours here. Over there it was. It was a very long shift. I need to... She stopped, and the 12 years of clinical discipline reassembled around the wobble the way it always did, holding the shape of the professional while the person inside it processed at human speed. "I need to make a phone call, and then I need to go back, and then I need to explain to you what back means, and what the water on the floor is, and why the building is humming in 4 beats, and a lot of things. But the phone call first." "Staff break room," Rodriguez said, because the night shift solves problems in order of proximity. "The landline still works. The cell towers have been acting strange since about 3 o'clock. "Since 3 o'clock, Lena said. Yes, they would have been. The break room was exactly as she had left it. The same vending machine, the same stained couch, the same corkboard with its yellowed fire safety notices and shift swap requests. And the ordinariness of it nearly undid her, because ordinariness is the thing you miss last and the thing that hits hardest. And a woman who had stood on the shore of the foundation of 2 worlds discovered that the break room of a mid-tier hospital could hold just as much grief as any ocean if you hadn't seen it in long enough. Her phone was in her locker. Dead, of course. 3 hours and 43 minutes of dead battery to the phone's memory, though the phone's memory was wrong by a season and a war. She plugged it in. She used the landline. She dialed her mother's number from muscle memory, and the number was the same because some things do not change when the universe does, and a mother's phone number is one of them. It rang 4 times. It always rang 4 times. Her mother screened calls before 7 a.m. as a matter of personal policy, and the policy had not been suspended by the healing of an interdimensional wound. Then, hello? The voice, groggy, wary, the voice of a woman who has been woken early and suspects telemarketers. Who is this? It's not even 7. Mom. Silence. The specific silence of a mother hearing a voice she was not expecting and processing in the space of one held breath, the distance between asleep and the most awake she has been in 11 years. Lena, sweetheart, it's the middle of the night, is everything. Mom, listen, I need to say something, and I need to say it now, and it's going to sound strange, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you ask questions. She closed her eyes. The break room held her, the vending machine hum, the stained couch, the landline cord coiled like a stethoscope, and she delivered the message she had carried across 2 worlds and 1 war and a shore at the bottom of everything, in the voice her father had used for the important things, plainly, without decoration, the way you give news that changes the weather. Dad says the garden fence still isn't finished, and he watched you pay the man too much. The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a lock turning, a very specific lock, one that 2 people had built together over 40 years of marriage, and one of them had been holding from the other side for 11, waiting for the key that meant I see you, and it's safe to be sad now. The sound her mother made was not a word. It was the sound of the lock opening and the door behind it, and 11 years of held breath on Sunday phone calls rushing out through a telephone line at 6:47 in the morning, and Lena held the phone and let it come, and did not try to stop it, because stopping it would have been malpractice of the most personal kind. How? Her mother said at last, and the word was not a question about mechanism, it was a question about permission. Permission to believe that the fence, which had been a private joke between a carpenter and his wife for 37 years and had never once been mentioned to their daughter, could arrive in a phone call at dawn and mean what it meant. He told me, Lena said. He is, Mom, he is okay. He is not gone the way we thought. He is kept, and keeping it's not what we imagined. It's better, The wobble took the sentence, and she let it have the sentence, because some sentences are better unfinished, and the unfinishing is the truth. He said, the shift is over. Both of ours. He said you held his hand with a grip like a bench vise and told him not to make it the saddest thing, and you've spent 11 years being strong about it on the phone with me, and Mom. She was crying now, the proper crying, the kind the break room of a mid-tier hospital was secretly, specifically designed for. The fence is not finished, and it's safe to be sad now, and I love you, and I am going to come home and explain everything. But first I need to go back to work, because there is a river in another world that is holding a door open for me, and I am not done with my shift. You, said her mother, with the specific maternal clarity that exists in no medical textbook and outranks every clinical protocol ever written, are going to come home and explain every word of what you just said, Lena Marie Marlowe. And if you think you are going back to any shift before I see your face, Sunday, Lena said. Mom, Sunday, I'll be here. And this time, we're going to talk about the fence. The silence that followed was a different silence. The silence of a lock that has opened and found, on the other side, not emptiness, but a room that was always there, and a man's laugh in the furnishings, and permission to sit down in it at last. Sunday, said her mother. Bring coffee. And Lena? Yeah? Whatever the fence means, and wherever the back is that you need to go to. A breath. And the bench vise grip was in the voice, 40 years of holding on and 11 of holding up. Your father always did pay the man too much. That is the most him sentence I have heard in 11 years, and I am going to be a wreck on Sunday, and you are going to sit there and watch and not try to fix it, because fixing isn't the same as being there, Lena finished. I know, Mom. A very wise river taught me that. Sunday. She hung up. She sat in the break room for 120 seconds. She counted. She always counted. And the counting was the keeping, and the keeping was the healing, and the healing was the deep, and the deep hummed through the pipes of St. Aldrich's Hospital, the way it hummed through the rivers of Ilarion, because the window was open now, and the water was the same on both sides, and a fence that had been unfinished for 11 years was 3 phone calls, and 1 Sunday away from becoming the most repaired thing in 2 worlds. She walked back through the window at 7:03. The membrane held. It held the way Sarathiel had promised. Self-sustaining, permeable, a living tissue maintained by the deep's own circulation. And walking through it was not like walking through a door, and not like crossing a bridge, and was exactly, precisely, unmistakably like stepping from one room of a house into another. The house had 2 rooms now. The rooms shared water. The Sareth received her back with the specific warmth of a river that had kept a carpenter's laugh and a princess's glee, and 900 years of the wrongly held, and was now, at last, doing what rivers do, flowing freely in both directions, connecting everything it touched. Doramir was waiting in the water. He had not left the river, had stood there, waist deep, tear blazing, for the entire duration of her crossing, holding the cord in the water the way a surgeon holds an incision open for the colleague who has gone to fetch the instrument, and his face when she emerged was the face from the first clearing, the face from the balcony, the face from a shore at the bottom of the world, the dawn on a mountain face, the one that changed everything and changed nothing. The one that had been there since the beginning and would be there, she knew now, with the certainty of a doctor who has read the chart, for every shift that followed. "How was Tuesday?" asked the king of the Kant Peaks, waist deep in the holiest river in 2 worlds, with 2 burning lamps on his belt and the grin of a man who has been rehearsing this line for weeks. "It's not Tuesday," Lena said, wading to him through the golden water, through the light, through the count that held and would hold and had always held. "It's Sunday. I have a date with my mom. You're coming. I was told I would hate Tuesdays." "You're going to love Sundays," said the healer of 2 worlds, and kissed him in the river between them, and the deep kept the kiss the way it kept everything, wholly, warmly, and with the door wide open. Section 9. The first week of the window taught both worlds what a membrane actually meant. On Ilarian's side, it meant the river glowed, and the sky had a patch of fluorescent ceiling in it. And occasionally, at dawn and dusk, when the light was right and the membrane was thinnest, the peoples camped along the Sareth could see, through the shimmer, the ordinary miracle of the other world going about its morning. Cars on a road, pigeons on a sill, a woman walking a dog past a hospital parking lot, all of it rendered in the sky above the holiest river in the world, like a painting hung in a cathedral, unremarkable and shattering at once. On Earth's side, it meant that the puddle in the emergency bay of St. Aldrich's did not go away, and the building hummed in 4 beats, and the institutional plumbing began, gently and without explanation, to produce water that was warmer than it should have been, and faintly golden in certain lights. Rodriguez documented everything. Rodriguez had been documenting everything since 3 o'clock on the night in question, and had, by the end of the first week, produced the most comprehensive incident report in the history of hospital administration, which administration read, filed under unexplained, and quietly decided never to mention again, because some things are above the pay grade of the entire species. But the membrane meant more than shimmer and warm plumbing. It meant passage, both ways. The window was not a spectacle. It was a door, and the door worked, and the working changed everything. Lena crossed twice that first week, once to check on her patients, once to file the paperwork that would keep her medical license from expiring while she practiced in a universe that did not technically have a licensing board. And each crossing was the same impossible ordinary experience, a step through golden water, a moment of both worlds at once, and then linoleum and coffee and the night shift, asking her questions she could not answer without a whiteboard, and 6 hours. She brought things back. Antibiotics. The elven healer's herbcraft was magnificent for the slow work, but 12 years of emergency medicine had opinions about acute bacterial infections, and those opinions traveled well. Textbooks for the healing halls of 3 nations, a solar-powered lamp which the Undervault's engineers disassembled in a day and reassembled in a week as something no one in either world had imagined, a hybrid of coal glass and photovoltaic that burned clean and white and drew its charge from both the sun and the deep's own circulation, and which Derm, holding the prototype, called the first honest thing this world has built with both hands. And she brought coffee. A full pot, still hot, carried through the window in both hands and delivered to the war circle of Cantalar at the morning session, and the king of the Kant Peaks drank his first cup of earth coffee with an expression that the remembrancer's stone would preserve for 10,000 years. The face of a man encountering a beverage that is simultaneously terrible and necessary, and understanding in one sip everything about the world that had produced the woman he loved. "This," said Doromir, setting down the cup with the caution of a man handling a cultural weapon, "is the most aggressive drink I have ever tasted. It has no interest in being enjoyed. It exists purely to keep you awake against your will." A pause. "I understand Tuesdays now." Avel's new role found him the way the Count had found Phelan. By accident, by necessity, by the specific gravity of the only person in the world who could do the job. The membrane required tending, not repair. It was self-sustaining, as Sareth had promised, but attendance. The healed wound was a living tissue, and living tissue needed monitoring, checking for inflammation, for scar creep at the margins, for the 1,000 small complications that follow any major surgery. And the only person on two worlds who understood the keeping script well enough to read the membrane's vital signs, who could put his scarred hands on the window between the worlds and feel, in the deep's own language, whether the tissue was healthy, was the man who had cut the wound in the first place. It was the remembrancer who named it, with the paper-dry precision that had navigated the whole age. The deep had keepers once. It needs keepers again. Not the old kind, not surgeons who cut and extract. Attendants, healers of the membrane, watchers of the window. The title exists in the old records, Keeper Avel. It was, before the falling, the highest honor your order held. The blind face turned. "Will you take it? Not as redemption. The healer has been clear, as shift resumption. The log says you are on duty. The deep agrees, and the membrane." A pause. "The membrane says it would prefer to be checked by the hand that understands it best, even if that hand was once the one that hurt it. Especially then." Avel stood at the membrane's edge, at the Sareth, where the window shimmered between the worlds, and placed his scarred hands on the living tissue, and the keeping script in the membrane answered his touch the way the keeper's road had answered his palm, with recognition and warmth, and the vast patient readiness of a body that has been waiting 10,000 years for its surgeon to come home and start healing. "Shift resuming," said the keeper of the membrane, and began his rounds. Sunday came the way Sundays do in every world, slowly, inevitably, carrying the weight of every promise made during the week. Lena crossed at 1000 Ilarian time, which was, she had begun to map the time differential because the healer in her could not help mapping, roughly 800 on the Earth side, which was roughly the time her mother started her second coffee and her first crossword, and the particular Sunday morning state of mind that Lena had spent 11 years avoiding by working shifts. She did not go alone. Doromir crossed with her, and the crossing was, she watched his face the whole way, the face of a 900-year-old man stepping into a story he has heard told by the person he loves, and discovering, in one breath, that the story smells of exhaust fumes and laundry detergent and is louder than he imagined. "The air," he said, standing on the St. Aldrich's parking lot in the morning light, in his traveling cloak, the tear hidden under his collar, his ears covered by a knit cap Lena had borrowed from Rodriguez's locker. "The air is thick, and," he turned slowly, cataloguing the way he had catalogued her in a clearing in Silverin. "The sound. Everything is sounding, Lena. The ground is sounding, and the sky is sounding, and that," he pointed at a bus pulling away from the stop. "That thing just shouted at me. That's a bus. It didn't shout. It has a schedule, and the schedule is indifferent to kings." She took his arm. "Also, nobody can see your ears. The cap works. You look like a very tall, very confused tourist, which is what you are. Ready?" "I was born ready," said the king of the Kant Peaks, looking at a gas station with the expression of a man who has discovered that the other world runs on bottled fire. "I am merely not ready for this." The drive to her mother's house, Rodriguez's car, borrowed with a promise of comprehensive debriefing, took 20 minutes, and Doromir spent every one of them with his face pressed to the window, cataloguing at elven speed, and the questions he asked were, individually, the most revealing things Lena had ever heard about her own world. Why do the buildings not share walls? Where are the rivers? The trees, why are they alone? Do they not share roots? And, as they pulled into her mother's street, the houses have fences, all of them. Why do they need fences? "Because humans," Lena said, parking, looking at the house she had grown up in, which was smaller than she remembered, which is the thing houses do when you have spent a season in a mountain and a war in a canyon. Because humans need to know where their yard ends and someone else's begins. It's not hostility, it's keeping, Doromir said quietly. It is keeping. A small square of earth, bounded, held. I understand fences now, Lena. They are the smallest possible act of the same thing the deep does. She looked at him, and loved him with a precision that had nothing clinical in it, and everything diagnostic. Because he had, in 20 minutes and a bus, seen the thing about her world that she had needed 12 years of emergency medicine and 2 universes to learn, that the human impulse to hold a small piece of the world and call it home was not a flaw. It was the count, rendered in fence posts. 3, and then 1. My yard, my family, my grief, my girl. The fence, she said, looking at her parents' house, at the garden fence her father had started and never finished, and a hired man had botched, and her mother had overpaid, is not finished, and we are here to finish it. We are here, said Doromir, opening the car door with the careful attention of a man who has watched the mechanism exactly once and intends to master it. To be present. The fence is the fence's business. The being here is ours. Her mother opened the door, and 11 years of Sunday phone calls ended in the foyer. The embrace lasted. Lena did not count. For the first time in her adult life, she did not count. She held her mother the way the deep held the kept, wholly, without schedule, for exactly as long as the keeping required, and her mother held her back with the bench-vise grip of a woman who had been told by a dead man not to make this the saddest thing, and had obeyed for 11 years and was done obeying. The tears were the proper tears. The break-room tears, the kind that come when the shift is finally over and you are in a place that does not require you to be steady. And Lena let them come, and her mother let them come, and neither of them tried to fix anything, because being there was not the same as fixing, and the river had taught them both. When the holding eased, not ended, eased, the way tides ease, her mother looked past Lena's shoulder at the very tall, very confused man standing in the foyer in a knit cap, looking at a family photograph on the wall with the expression of someone reading a medical chart for the first time. And who, said Catherine Marlowe, with the particular maternal X-ray that requires no stethoscope, is that? That, said Lena, is a very long story. He's a king, Mom. He's an elf. He fought a war with me. He held a door open in a river while I came here to call you. He carried my lamps, the wobble, and the truth inside the wobble. And he understands fences. Her mother looked at Doromir. Doromir looked at her mother. And the king of the Kant Peaks, who had faced Torima and membranes and the foundation of 2 worlds without blinking, removed the knit cap, because some audiences deserve the unedited version, and the pointed ears emerged into the foyer of a house in a city that did not believe in elves, and Catherine Marlowe looked at the ears, and at the green eyes, and at the tall, beautiful, impossible man who was visibly, desperately, attempting to navigate a foyer, and said the sentence that Lena would keep for the rest of both her lives. He looks like he needs coffee. Does he drink coffee? He has opinions about coffee, Lena said. Good, said Catherine Marlowe, turning toward the kitchen in the manner of a woman whose fence was about to be finished by a king, and whose Sunday had just become the most interesting day in the history of the species. I have opinions too. Come in, both of you, and someone, the bench-vise voice, carrying over her shoulder, is going to explain the fence. Section 10. They spent Sunday afternoon in the garden, and the fence got finished. Not by a king and not by a healer. The actual carpentry was done by Doromir, who had discovered, within 20 minutes of being handed a hammer by Catherine Marlowe, that his 900 years of archery had given him precisely the wrist control needed for finish nailing, and that the satisfaction of driving a nail flush was, in his considered opinion, at least as rewarding as holding a corridor against 3 centuries of chosen evil. The grain runs this way, he said, examining a fence board with an intensity that Catherine, watching from the kitchen window with Lena, both of them holding coffee, both of them doing the thing mothers and daughters do when a man is being useful in the garden, silently, thoroughly, assessing, found, frankly alarming for a man who learned what a fence was this morning. He's an elf, Lena said. They read wood. He reads everything, said Catherine Marlowe, and the X-ray gaze, passing from the garden to her daughter, did the thing maternal gazes do across the species divide. It read her, and the reading was the chart of 11 years of Sunday silences finally, comprehensively opened. He reads you the way your father read me, not like a book, like weather. I've watched him for 2 hours, Lena. He watches you the way your father watched the workshop door when he knew I was about to come in, with his hands already busy and his whole attention already turned. A pause, and the bench vise voice, which had spent the morning weeping and the afternoon hardening into the specific maternal alloy of joy and terror, dropped to its most operational register. He's not human. No. He's 900 years old. Yes. He has pointed ears, and he is fixing my fence. Yes. And the river, the one you described, with your father in it, and the keeping. You're telling me that Jim is in the water, and the water is under this house, and the water is the same water as the water in the other. Mom. Lena set down the coffee. Dad squeezed my hand at the end, 3 times, then once. Our pattern. And the water knew it, and the water kept it. And a man at the bottom of the world squeezed my hand in the same pattern and said, in Dad's voice, my girl. And he said to tell you about the fence. And he said, the wobble, the one she had promised herself she would not do again today, and was doing anyway, because some promises are meant to be broken by their own honesty. He said it's safe to be sad now. Both of ours. Catherine Marlowe looked at the garden, where a 900-year-old king was fitting a fence board with the care of a man who understands, in his bones, that this particular fence is the most important structure in 2 worlds. Then she looked at her daughter. Then she said the thing that Lena would carry back through the window and keep in both lives forever. Your father always said the fence was a 2-person job. I think he always meant. The bench vise cracked one last time in the right direction. He meant he wanted me to find the second person, not to finish it. To start the next one with. The maternal X-ray, wet and operational and absolutely certain. You found him, sweetheart. In another universe, because of course you did. You were never going to find him at the hospital. You'd have diagnosed him and filed him and never looked up from the chart. You had to fall through a mirror to look up. She reached across the kitchen counter and took Lena's hand, and the grip was the bench vise, and the bench vise was the count, 3 and then 1, and the count was the deepest thing in 2 worlds. And it ran through a kitchen in a house with an almost finished fence on a Sunday that had been 11 years in the arriving. Bring him for dinner, said Catherine Marlowe. Every Sunday, both worlds' Sundays, if there are 2, and tell the river. The voice, broken and rebuilt and load-bearing, the voice of a woman whose husband's laugh had volunteered from the far side of everything and been kept. Tell the river the fence is finished, and the man paid exactly the right amount. They drove back to St. Aldrich's at dusk, and the drive was quiet, in the way of drives after large days, full quiet, not empty quiet, and Doromir held a box of Catherine's leftover lasagna on his lap with the gravity of a man carrying a diplomatic gift, which it was. Your mother, he said, somewhere on the highway, with the headlights of other cars washing over the tears-hidden glow, is the most terrifying being I have encountered in either world. And I have encountered a membrane and a Tarima sorcerer and a shore at the bottom of everything. She likes you, Lena said. She assessed me, for 4 hours, with lasagna as the controlled variable. He looked down at the box. In Kanthalar, we call that a siege. In my world, we call that Sunday dinner. You survived. That's the assessment. Lena, his voice changed. The shimmer-light voice, the quiet one. The one that held the weight of things he had been carrying since a balcony in a city of waterfalls. Your mother said a thing in the kitchen while you were showing me the photographs. She said it to the river, to the water in the sink, I think, because the water was warm and golden, and she was speaking to it the way you speak to patients. She said, thank you for keeping him. I'd like to visit. And then she washed a dish and did not mention it again. Lena's hands tightened on the wheel, and the deep, running through the plumbing of every house on the highway, hummed once, warm, vast, content. Then we'll bring her to the Sareth, Lena said, when she's ready, and she can stand in the water, and the water will show her what it showed me, and she'll hear his voice, and Mom will handle it, Doromir. She's been handling everything alone for 11 years. Handling it together is going to be the easy part. The easy part, said the king of the Kant Peaks, holding lasagna on a highway between a hospital and a river, is always the part you do with someone. The months that followed would fill their own books, and Phelan, true to his word, was writing them in a journal that grew thicker with every crossing, every ward round, every Sunday, every small impossible miracle of 2 worlds learning to share a membrane. The membrane held. Avel tended it. Morning rounds, Evening rounds, the keeper's log filling with entries for the first time in 3 centuries, each one ending with the same 2 words, shift continuing. The deep's circulation ran clean through both worlds, and the rivers glowed, and the rain was warm, and the people of Ilarion learned, season by season, to visit their dead in running water, to kneel at a stream and ask, and hear, and weep, and go home lighter. And the people of Earth learned, much more slowly, that their plumbing had an opinion about grief, and the opinion was kind. Lena worked both sides. 3 days in Canthalar, the healing halls, the unbecome wards, the endless beautiful work of teaching a world's worth of healers, the thing the undervault had taught her: hand, count, name. 3 days at St. Aldrich's, her patients, her shifts, her cold coffee, her Rodriguez, the ER doctor who vanished for 3 hours and came back with a stethoscope that hummed in 4 beats and a referral network that spanned a literal universe. And Sundays at Catherine's, always Sundays, with lasagna and a king who was learning to love Tuesdays after all, and a fence that stood in the garden like a thesis, finished, load-bearing, proof that 2-person jobs get done when the second person finally shows up. Doromir learned coffee. He learned highways. He learned the specific weight of a world that loses everything it loves within a single elven youth, and gets up the next morning and builds anyway, the thing the amphitheatre had wept at, rendered now in gas stations and school runs, and the way Catherine Marlowe checked the fence every morning, not because it might have fallen, but because checking was how you kept a thing you'd built with someone who wasn't there anymore, and wasn't gone anymore either, just downstream, reachable by water, kept the way everything loved is kept, in the deep that runs beneath both worlds and does not let go. He wore the cap less often now. Rodriguez had opinions about the ears. The ears, she said, were the most reasonable part of the whole situation, and anyone who could drink Catherine Marlowe's coffee and survive was human enough for the night shift. On the last page of the first volume of his journal, the one he had promised to write, the one nobody at home would believe, Phelan wrote the entry that would outlast the war, the surgery, the membrane, the whole architecture of the age. The healer came to us from a world of cold coffee and unfinished fences. She brought a stethoscope, a count, and the stubbornest pair of hands I have ever served under. She taught us that the dark is not the enemy, the forgetting is the enemy. She taught us that a wound is not a wall, it is a door that hasn't decided what to be yet. She taught us that the dead are not gone, they are downstream, and the river shares, and the sharing is the whole of the keeping, and the keeping is the whole of the world. She crossed 2 universes, healed a god, married a king, finished a fence, and called her mother every Sunday. She was a doctor. She was on the night shift. She never once stopped counting. 3, and then 1. 3, and then 1. 3, and then 1. And at the Sareth, on an evening in the first spring of the new age, the healer of 2 worlds stood in the golden water, with her feet bare, and her stethoscope around her neck, and her 7 beads catching the light of 2 moons, and 1 fading shimmer that was no longer a wound, and no longer a window, but simply the way things were now. And she listened. The deep's pulse came through the silver serpent, steady, vast, content. 3, and then 1. Good, said Dr. Lena Marlowe, to the river, to the keeping, to the deep that had grown her, to her father in the water, and her mother on the phone, and the king who hated Tuesdays, and the boy who kept the count, and the captain who never smiled, and the nurse who laid a towel beside a puddle, and the old keeper mending his rounds, and the blind woman whose stone was still singing, and the canyon wolves, and the lamp children, and the giants in their groves, and the impossible, stubborn, relentless, beautiful pulse of everything alive and kept and connected. Good, vital, stable, patient as well. She put the stethoscope away and walked out of the river and went home, both of them.